Last up for our fixed income panel, Conrad Wood, a man that needs very little introduction. Conrad, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Good to have you here. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Eugene. Thanks to BCI for the opportunity, and to you guys for taking time out of your busy schedules. I think try something a little bit different today. I think there's enough sort of coverage of the granularity of fixed income markets and the bottom up and the next year's 6 months forecast return. So I'm going to sort of remove us from that noise. I find managing money in this environment, if you listen to all the headlines and you get caught in the daily ups and downs, you feel like you're in a washing machine when you're managing money. So I'm going to go really top down and go to 10,000 feet today and look at some what we call macro Ds that are coming down the tunnel over the next 5 years that I think we should all be aware of. They're not going to change portfolios tomorrow. They're not going to change the way we act immediately, but it's that classic, if you don't pay attention to them, it's the frog being boiled in hot water. And by the time you realize that they're upon us, it might be a little bit too late. So the first D, demographics. And I'm part of this. World's getting older, unfortunately. This chart shows you on the left-hand side a map of the world, and it shows the birth rate per, I don't even know if you can say birth rate per woman anymore. The birth rate per person. So birth rates per woman, and blue are more than 2 children per woman. And I don't know, I've seen this chart maybe 10 years ago, the whole world was blue. It's now become progressively purple, and purple is where you dip below 2 children per woman, and it's emerging markets, it's developed world, it's Latin America, it's Asia, the whole bang shoot. The world's having less babies. I see Africa is do it for your country, sort of the motto is still going strong there, but the world's getting older, and therefore more dependent. On the right-hand side, that chart shows you the number of working age, productive, contributing to growth people that are supporting the number of old tuppies that are not adding much value to the economy anymore. And you can just see, it's not a very clear chart, but the progression starts 1997, the top dots, it comes down to current, and the dark dots are where we'll be in the year 2050. And if you look at the extreme right-hand column, we have come from 10 working class productive people supporting 1 old timer, and we will be down to, I think it's 3.9 if I remember there, by 2050, playing a supportive role, earning taxes, being productive to support someone who's not contributing to the system. So an older world with much more dependency is something that is coming down the tunnel. The second D, democratization. And I'm actually going to go, or lack thereof. And it's not really the opposite of democratization, but I wanted to talk about here is populism. The rise of populism in the world. Those 2 panels show you on the left-hand side, in a sample of 61 countries, in the year 2000, less than 5% of those countries had populist governments in place. Currently, it's got up to 25% of those 61 countries have populist governments in place. And on the right-hand panel, you can see, not very clearly again, but the green bars show you in a sample set, countries where the populace is happy with the outcomes of democracy, versus in the blue bars, those who are dissatisfied with outcomes of democracy. And you can see the blue bars are starting to dominate the green bars, and in some cases become quite meaningful in terms of dissatisfaction with the outcomes of democracy. And populism is not just Venezuela or Argentina anymore. We are moving to the leader of the first world, America. And if you just have a look at what's gone on there, it's almost unimaginable. And that picture just sort of said 1,000 words to me. The Trump domineering, tall, big in stature, almost bullying. And there's the Fed chairman. I don't know much about psychoanalysis, but I don't think that posture is one of confidence or domineering. He looks absolutely cowed. And I mean, this is happening in America. It's well documented on the K-shaped recovery. So I don't know the proportion, but a lot of America is doing incredibly well, and a lot of America is doing incredibly poorly, and hence the notion of the K-shaped recovery. And Trump is preying on this. And this is being exacerbated by social media and the polarism that's developing inside that economy. And if you just have a look at some of the things that are coming through in this battle of the people versus elites. And the irony is Trump is one of the elites who's now representing the people. But things like anti-immigration, things like trying to bring back suboptimal manufacturing industries, messing with the electoral system, increasing of military, attacks on established institutions. These are all populist traits that are prevalent in what was meant to be one of the world's biggest and most stable democracies. The third D, so after demographics, after democratization, is deglobalization. Now, you've seen this emanate in America as well. This whole, pulling apart of the world, taking it into silos, taking it into isolationism. After we've just spent 3 decades of bringing it all together and benefiting from the rise in growth and the fall in inflation that globalization brings, we've got America pulling us in the opposite way under their America First sort of narrative. Trying to reestablish domestic manufacturing capacity, trying to secure their supply chains, trying to reduce this burden of them being sort of the defender of the world from a military perspective, and in the process, really alienating their allies. And this chart shows you, again, in a quite substantial research poll, the percentage of countries who have a favorable opinion of the US has gone from a peak of about 63 in this country group to 35. Call it halved, and the group of countries that have a favorable opinion of China, yes, not a material rise, but anyway, up from 24 to 33, I think. And this is a difference in approach. China is courting other countries. America is bashing them on the head with a stick as this world moves apart. The fourth D, de-dollarization. And a lot has been made of this. Is the US dollar here to stay? Is it going to be the dominant currency in the world still? What's going to happen? Should we exit? Chart on the left shows you the percentage of global foreign exchange reserves and gold that is in US dollars. That's gone from a peak of just under 75% down to the current 60%. So 15% of global forex reserves has moved out of US dollar denominated assets. And that has corresponded quite nicely with the rise in gold. So gold is one of the places where this money is going. There are others as well, but gold is quite prevalent. So is it the end of the dollar? Is it doomed? The chart on the right would suggest not. That shows you the volume of all forex transactions in the world that are still dollar-based, and that's actually going up quite significantly. And 88% of all foreign exchange transactions are still in dollars globally, which suggests that the exit from the dollar is a cyclical sort of phenomenon that's happening now, and it's not quite yet a structural or permanent phenomenon. And the reason it's happening, in our view, is that look at the inflows that came into America over the last sort of 20 years, per asset class, and it just went absolutely, parabolic as the US economy outperformed, as the dollar was strong, and as there were increasingly less alternatives to invest in anywhere else. And that, at a time now where those foundations are shaky and the policy uncertainty is elevated, just simply some of that money is likely to come loose and just reverse. And the chart on the right-hand side is meant to give an indication of that. Looking across a few jurisdictions, the bars show you when a foreign country is invested in US dollars, how much of that have they traditionally hedged back into their home currency? So I like the US asset, I want to be in Meta, or I want to be in Google, but I don't want the dollar exposure, I want that in Swiss francs or Danish crowns. How much is hedged? And you can see the orange dots show you where those hedge ratios are currently versus the blue dots, which are the 10-year average, versus the top of the black line, which is the maximum it's been over time, suggesting that if the rest of the world starts to want to hedge their dollar exposures, there is a fair amount of dollar outflows that will still come from the US, which will give this cyclical deterioration of the dollar significantly more momentum. And you see US Treasury holdings on the left there, both private and official. The reduction in the foreign ownership of US Treasury holdings has come down quite significantly. But noticeable, it's not just been since Trump came in. This started a long, long time ago, where there was active unwinding of US Treasuries holdings by foreigners. And the chart on the right is work done by JP Morgan that suggests that for every 1% of GDP that foreigners take out of the US bond market, that has a 30 basis point upward impact on US Treasury yields. And so we think it's quite conceivable that about 3% of GDP could leave the US bond market on these hedging type strategies. And if this analysis is right, that would equate to 150 basis points of upward move in US bond yields. Now, we might have had some of that already. US bonds have had a terrible sort of 2.5 years in terms of returns and upward moves in yields. But this theme of de-dollarization, particularly the cyclical part of it, is very much entrenched in our view and could put pressure on the dollar and on US bonds. The last D, deficits and debt, which is abundant, and everyone's spoken about that. A lot's been said about it. The US particularly, and there are many other countries in the world, are running budget deficits the size of which have traditionally been run in wartime. When you're building military equipment, when you're putting every single cent in the economy to work in terms of defending yourself, the budget deficits are in peacetime the same size as wartime deficits, and the US needs to borrow significantly to keep that party going and to keep that sort of merry-go-round going around. In fact, over the next 5 years, if their deficit gets to 8%, which we think it's likely to do, they would need to borrow between $3 to $5 trillion worth of debt in their local bond market. So those are the 5 Ds, and I'm not going to go through this all, but if you look at the consequences of those Ds, and you look at the impact thereof on US bonds, it's almost unequivocally bad for the US bond market. So it's more spending, it's more borrowing, it's more dependency on the government, it's more support, it's less growth, it's higher inflation, it's less productivity. Now, I mentioned the word productivity, so I'm not saying these Ds are the only exclusive macro drivers. We are in the middle of this CapEx AI boom that could well provide a productivity offset of meaningful proportions. But if you look at just in isolation here, all of those lead to higher US bond yields, steeper yield curves, and a widening of US risk premia. And you see that coming through in US Treasury bonds. The chart on the right shows you the widening of the risk premia embedded in US Treasury yields over the last sort of 5 years or so. And it's gone from being as ridiculous as minus 50 to minus 100 basis points when the Fed was buying all the US government bonds themselves and compressing yields through their financial repression sort of policies. It's gone from minus 100 all the way to approaching plus 100. A complete repricing or derating of risk inside US government bond yields. And this brings us to the 6th D. So bonus, parcela one for you. And this is like turkeys voting for Christmas as a fixed income portfolio manager. I should not be saying this up here. But if you look at the left-hand chart shows you holdings of US government bonds or market cap of US government bonds. It is up 7-fold in the last 20 years. The market cap of US bonds has increased by 20 times, and this is not because its value is going up, this is because they're creating more of them. The currency that they are paying you your interest in is also up 7 times. The US dollar money supply is on the right. You're holding a piece of paper that has increased in supply by 7 times, and you're being paid in a currency that has increased in supply by 7 times. You are getting debased at a rapid rate of knots. And this chart shows you the debasement or the devaluation of the dollar over the last 100 years. At the start, 25 US dollars is equivalent to $1 today. In 2020 alone, they created 20% of all US dollars ever in circulation during that COVID period. And so as a holder of US debt, you are getting poorer and poorer and poorer as you sit there. And this has changed the characteristics of US bonds. They were pretty much, as you went, they followed the dollar, hand in glove, and you can see the complete dislocation, and I apologize for typos, that should read 2025, 2024, it is current. There's been a complete dislocation in that market. The dollar is weak, and US bonds are weak. They've completely separated themselves. The dollar's tanked 12% and US bonds have gone up to 4.5%. They've completely decoupled. And the market is asking the question, as are we, what is the job of US bonds going forward? And the chart on the right shows you that the correlation or the diversification benefit you got from US bonds has flipped completely. They used to be a good hedge in a portfolio. When the S&P tanked, US bonds would do well, and that's how you got your protection in the classic 60-40 portfolio. The correlation with US equity has just flipped positive in the last couple of years. So when equities tank, bonds tank. And when equities rally, bonds don't rally, which is not an awesome characteristic to have as the global diversifier. So I'm going to leave it with, well, who cares? What about South African bonds, which is the dominant asset in the local fixed income portfolios? And traditionally, there's quite a strong correlation between US bonds and South African bonds. The line is upward sloping. There's some idiosyncratic, times when they diverge, but generally higher US yields bad for South African bonds is the way we've sort of thought about it, using historical correlations. But what you've seen during this period where US bonds have come under this pressure and derated and widening risk premium is that South African bond yields, of all the things you would not have expected to do this, have compressed by 200 basis points relative to US bonds. So in the time when US bonds have done really, really poorly, South African bonds have compressed and done really, really well. And I'll leave you with an unanswered question, because I'm still trying to answer it, is are we entering an era now where you can have emerging market assets behave differently to how they used to behave against US bonds? And are US bonds really the global sort of risk-free bastion that they have been, that we've based our valuation criteria on for so long when looking at South African bonds? And the answer may just be that they're not anymore, given these 5 Ds, but I guess time will tell as we move along. Thank you very much, guys.
Conrad, very insightful indeed. And recently we've seen how some managers, if they want to hedge out some of the global equity, they actually buy US bonds. Are you now telling us if you want to hedge out global equity, buy SA bonds?
Or Brazil, or Mexico, or any of the other EMs. These correlations are broken, and it's going to lead to interesting portfolio construction decisions going forward.
Very interesting indeed. Conrad, thank you so much.
Thanks, Eugene. Thank you.